has got it wrong. I began by asking him if he concedes the DUP has now breached its own red line of not having a border down the Irish Sea.
We made clear as far back as our 2017 manifesto that we were willing to consider Northern Ireland-specific solutions in relation to the border, provided they were not detrimental and harmful to the Northern Ireland economy. And that's why we have, in the context of getting a clear veto for the Assembly, in getting an assurance that Northern Ireland will remain part of the UK customs arrangement, that we are now willing to look at a degree and on a temporary basis of regulation that enables that cross-border trade to continue until such times as we have the future relationship agreed between the European Union and the United Kingdom, which of course will deal with all of these issues.
Okay, so you're absolutely clear then. You're not hiding the fact that you have shifted your position. Those big voices from the DUP that we've all heard in recent months that have told us that any kind of border down the Irish Sea posed a constitutional threat to the integrity of the United Kingdom. You have moved away from that now. You no longer think that it poses a constitutional threat. Is that right?
Well, to be clear, Mark, there is no border between Northern Ireland and Great Britain, and these proposals will not create a border for any goods moving from Northern Ireland to Great Britain. That was fundamental for us, and I and others made it absolutely clear there must be no trade barrier between Northern Ireland and Great Britain so that we can continue to have full and unfettered access to our biggest market. And that
but we will now have regulatory
with
and standard checks. Does it not chill you to your bones when you hear leading voices from business and the agri-food sector coming out so quickly to say these proposals will not work? They are not in the best interests of the people and the businesses of Northern Ireland.
Well, I don't accept that. No,
so
Mark,
you know more about it than the people who run the businesses?
With respect, if you let me finish my answer, here is the fact and the reality that even the business leaders cannot dispute. We do far more business with the rest of the United Kingdom than we do with the EU and the rest of the world put together. I haven't heard a single business leader or representative of any sector in Northern Ireland that disputes that fact. Now, given that that is the fact, what we have delivered is to ensure there are no trade barriers to our biggest market in Great Britain. There are no regulatory barriers to us doing business with our biggest market in Great Britain, and we have accommodated sectors like the agri-food sector in continuing to do business across the border until such times as we have the future relationship agreed. And crucially for us, we've also ensured that the people of Northern Ireland, through their elected representatives, have a say, and that the Assembly is brought into this equation. That was very important. So, look, I understand the concerns of business representatives, but I have to take the interests of Northern Ireland as a whole, and the interests of Northern Ireland as a whole says very clearly, Mark, that we do far more business with Great Britain, and the idea that we would create customs and trade barriers between Northern Ireland and Great Britain to accommodate a much smaller amount of trade with the Irish Republic and the EU simply is not an argument that I can accept.
OK, retail NI. These proposals are a complete non-starter. Stephen Kelly from Manufacturing NI. Where there's a border, there are costs. Where there are costs, there is uncompetitiveness. Where there is that, then there are business closures and job losses.
Well, and I would say in response to them, I haven't heard them explain why they want to have a customs and regulatory border in the Irish Sea, because the cost of that to Northern Ireland business will be far greater, far greater, because we do more business with Great Britain. So I want to hear from Stephen, and I want to hear from Retail NI and others. I want them, and they haven't done it yet. I want them to explain.
I want the Freight Transport Association, if you just let me put the point, has addressed this issue very directly, and I'll tell you precisely what he said. He says this is a port solution put onto a land border. It just won't work. He's pointed to the high volume of cross-border trade, multiple cross-border traffic, and he says businesses which are engaged in that kind of operation will go to the wall. So he's precisely addressed this. He's listened to what you've said. He's looked at the proposals, and he said they will not work.
Well, and Seamus is entitled to his view, but I'm also entitled to mine, Mark. And I will point out yet again, once more, that we do far more business with Great Britain than we do with the European Union and the rest of the world combined.
These are business leaders whose job it is to represent the individuals and the organisations which are engaged in employing people and trading north, south, east, west. They represent tens of thousands of people. They've looked at the proposals. They say that they are worse than a no deal, and yet you say they're entitled to their opinion, but you don't agree with them.
And I'm entitled to not agree with them, Mark, with all due respect. And by the way, I was elected by tens of thousands of people in Northern Ireland.
It doesn't mean you're right.
Well, and it doesn't mean they're right either. When they say they speak for the majority in Northern Ireland, I'm simply saying that I too have a mandate. And my mandate as a unionist is to ensure that we are able to continue doing business with the rest of the United Kingdom, that there are no trade barriers between Northern Ireland and Great Britain. And I haven't yet heard any of the representatives that you've referred to explain to the people of Northern Ireland why they think it's a good idea that instead of having a barrier in relation to trade with the EU, we should instead have trade barriers with the rest of the United Kingdom, which is our biggest market. Okay, that simply doesn't make sense to me.
Okay, let's look at the facts. You are, of course, entitled to your opinion, and you're quite right to say that a lot of people vote for you. There is, however, a question of credibility that you haven't addressed. You stand, as I said before, in splendid isolation. Representatives of Sinn Féin, the Ulster Unionist Party, the SDLP, Alliance, the Greens, the TUV, Freight NI, Federation of Small Businesses, Manufacturing NI, Retail NI, the Northern Ireland Retail Consortium, the CBI, and I could go on, are all opposed to these proposals and all say, with respect I'm sure, Sir Jeffrey, you've got it wrong.
And they're entitled to their opinion.
Is that the best you can do? They're entitled to their opinion.
Well, Mark, if you wouldn't stop interrupting me, you know, I might get an answer out in this interview.
I think you've had plenty of opportunity to say what you want to say, and I'm very happy to have a dialogue. I'm pointing out the fact that there aren't many people, I can't find anybody who's weighing in behind the DUP to say, you've got it right. Tell me if I'm wrong.
Well, we've got the British government for a start. And since they are a very important player in all of this, I think that is important. We've worked hard to take on board concerns that people have raised. And we also recognise that in the end, the British people voted for Brexit, and we want to deliver Brexit with a deal. And if we can get a deal, we're working towards that. Then I think that is good for the United Kingdom to get a deal. Now, you're telling me that, in fact, the business leaders are now saying we'd rather have no deal. Well, that's a very interesting development, Mark, because they haven't been saying that before.
And that does represent a very, the backstop as the least worst option. They're saying, and I think you know this, Sir Jeffrey, I think you're being very disingenuous. What they're actually saying is these proposals are worse than a no-deal scenario. They're certainly not saying they want no deal. They've made it abundantly clear they do not want no deal. But what they're saying is these proposals are so dangerous, they are potentially more damaging than a no deal.
And so what is dangerous, Mark, about ensuring that we don't have trade barriers between Northern Ireland and Great Britain, between us and our biggest market? I'm sorry, I have yet to hear any of the representatives you've referred to give me a credible argument that says, yes, let's put trade barriers between Northern Ireland. We're going to be hearing from them
on the programme. I'll tell you, one of the things they're concerned about one border being turned into two borders. They're concerned about yet more uncertainty, and they're concerned about the possibility of the Assembly, which isn't sitting, being given responsibility for actually voting on this issue every 4 years. They may look at our political landscape in Northern Ireland and think it is full of individuals and organisations which are frankly pretty inept, and they're not prepared to give those individuals any more cover to do a job in future that they're not doing at all in the Assembly at the moment.
Okay, so to be clear, what you're saying is that the representatives you've spoken to have said they would prefer no deal to what is on the table, and secondly, they don't want the Assembly restored.
No, I didn't say that at all. I'm not saying that at all. They don't want necessarily the politicians of Northern Ireland in an Assembly which currently isn't sitting being given the opportunity or the requirement to actually discuss, debate and vote on this issue every 4 years. Look, you know very well businesses plan on a 5 to 10 year basis. How could a big business, or indeed a small business in Northern Ireland, plan anything whenever, every 4 years, our politicians, who agree on very little, will be debating and deciding what happens on regulatory alignment on whether or not there's a border in the Irish Sea?
Well, first of all, Mark, I don't agree with you that Northern Ireland politicians are incapable of agreeing. I think we've agreed a lot over the years. We do have our differences at the moment. We're trying to resolve them. We would like the Assembly to be restored. But, you know, what I don't understand is the idea that we can't accept democratic accountability, that we're saying, yeah, we like to have our Assembly, but actually we don't want our Assembly members taking crucial decisions about the future of Northern Ireland. Well, I fundamentally disagree with that, Mark. I think the people of Northern Ireland are entitled to their voice. I think their representatives are entitled to a say in all of this, and we have worked hard to secure that. At the heart of the agreements that has support, I think, across the political parties is the principle of consent. And the principle of consent for deciding on the future of Northern Ireland means that our elected representatives should have a say.
Okay, do you really want to set that hair running, I wonder, though? Because you've told us time and again that a discussion about a border in the Irish Sea is a discussion about a constitutional threat. The constitutional integrity of the United Kingdom is brought up by that conversation. And you're telling me at the same time you're perfectly relaxed to have that rehearsed on a 4-yearly basis in future. Seriously?
Well, Mark, it isn't about the constitutional position with respect. The question is whether we continue with an arrangement that allows
time and again
for
in the past
a degree
that the discussion
of
about the Irish Sea border
alignment,
is about
and that is the matter that we will be discussing in the Assembly. It's not about whether Northern Ireland should be part of the United Kingdom. That's already, in our opinion, settled. The principle of consent applies. Northern Ireland will not leave the United Kingdom unless and until the people of Northern Ireland decide otherwise. That is not the question
that
the Assembly will be determining when it discusses every 4 years if it has to. I mean, it may well be, Mark, that as a result of the exercise of this responsibility, the Assembly decides to discontinue these arrangements, so they are no longer a matter for debate every 4 years.
Seriously, you can't have it both ways. You can't come on this programme, as you've done in the past, and say these issues about the border and especially about putting a border in the Irish Sea, bring up the issue of a serious constitutional threat. You cannot come on and say that and then today say, because it suits your purposes, well, the constitutional issue is settled and there's no danger whatsoever in a discussion to this effect every 4 years. You know, which is it? Either it is a constitutional threat or it isn't.
Yeah, it has been settled, Mark, and it's been settled for this reason, that in these proposals, the Northern Ireland institutions, the Assembly, which is the UK authority dealing with such matters in Northern Ireland, will have to give its consent. First of all, on the question of opting into these new arrangements, the Assembly will have to give its consent, and secondly, as to whether those arrangements should continue in the future, the Assembly will have to give its consent. That means that our constitutional position is protected in law, Mark. That's very important for us. It's why we push so hard to ensure that the Assembly had a role. That's why I'm relaxed now about the idea of the Assembly being involved, and that because of that involvement, there is not a constitutional threat to Northern Ireland's position within the United Kingdom.
Okay, you raised the issue of consent, and it's a very interesting one. Arlene Foster, speaking in Dublin 2 weeks ago, said the agreement, whatever it is, the agreement must be one which can be supported by both unionists and nationalists. Not one single unionist MLA supports the withdrawal agreement, which is one reason why it has floundered. Not one nationalist, or indeed middle-of-the-road Alliance, and indeed many fellow unionists, support these proposals. What about their consent? Does that not matter?
Well, of course, and this will have to go before Parliament if there is an agreement between the EU and the UK. We're not there yet. Clearly, there will have to be further discussion and negotiation, and I fully expect that the other Northern Ireland parties will want to have their input into those discussions as well. We're not in any way seeking to exclude them from those discussions. No, you know very well. You've
very deftly tried to sidestep my question. You know exactly what I'm at. I'm not talking about the House of Commons. I'm not talking about Westminster. I'm talking about consent among the politicians here in Northern Ireland. You said unionists had to give their consent to the agreement. They didn't like the withdrawal agreement. That's why it floundered. I'm asking you about elected representatives in Northern Ireland not giving their consent to these proposals? Do their views not matter?
Of course they matter, Mark, and that's very important. And I'm saying that it is up to those parties, and I would fully expect that they will have their input. I'm sure they'll want to meet the Prime Minister and make their views known. I'm sure they'll make their views known also
to have a veto?
the European Union. And in the end, what we want to try and do is come to an accommodation with the EU and the UK.
Do they deserve to have a veto, Sir Jeffrey?
Well, look, Mark, in relation to the question of veto, the Assembly will now have a say. I don't have a veto.
The Assembly is not sitting.
I don't have a veto over anything at the moment. All I can do is have my say, use my influence as best I can to try and get the best deal for Northern Ireland. My party is in no different position in that respect to the other parties. We use our influence, we do our best, but we are very much focused on the need to ensure that Northern Ireland's position is protected, and I believe that the Assembly having a say, that the fact that we will continue in a customs union with the rest of the United Kingdom, that Northern Ireland businesses will continue to trade freely with the rest of the UK, is crucially important to the future of our economy.